Hello, and welcome to the Lauren Wilde Project podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Wilde, and I'm so excited to have you guys here and listening today. This podcast is for the leaders, the visionaries, the creatives, those that are seeking a more conscious and aware aspect of their growth and their impact on the world. I specialize in helping people reinvent themselves. Yes, I said reinvent themselves. And that is after usually a lifetime of having to perform and live in a way that is appropriate to the conditioning of their parents in their early childhood. I'm super excited to help you guys move through this content in this particular podcast, and let's go ahead and get into it. Hello, and welcome back to this episode of the Lauren Wilde Project. I'm Lauren Wilde. I am your podcast host, and I'm super excited to have you here today for part 2 of our Position Over Proving mini-series here on the podcast. So where we dropped off was about me talking about the power of learning how to work with your ego by becoming a witness to it versus letting it run you. So one of those very first things that you have to be able to do to get into subconscious work and healing and all of this, esoteric kind of psychological empowerment is you have to understand that you are not your personality. And I really learned a lot of this through yoga teacher training and then studying a lot of the works of Ram Dass, as well as Buddhism in general, which is basically like thousands of year old path of learning that you are not your personality. You are not your ego. Ram Dass always says this is your spacesuit. And sometimes we forget that we're wearing a spacesuit, but our souls are infinitely connected to something beyond the human experience. And what we're really here to do is become a participant in Earth School. And if you're interested in what the heck I'm talking about when I say that, please go back to my last season. That was Wild Sovereignty, and that was my Earth School series. It was like a series of 3 or 4 podcasts where I talk all about exactly what I'm saying right here. I don't want to get back into all of that right now when you can just go back and listen. But for today, I want to pick back up on where we were when it comes to position over proving and how really it's a pathway to sovereignty. And again, I talk about sovereignty the entire season, last season. So if you're like, what the hell is sovereignty, Lauren, please go back and listen to my last season. But just a brief, aspect is that sovereignty is about self-leadership. It's about self-mastery. It's about understanding that who you are as a soul-centric being is your responsibility to live out. It's nobody else's responsibility that you live and pursue your dharma. And you're really living according to your ethical standards and values versus living in a response to social conditioning and expectations. So, this whole thing is the embodiment and the calling of sovereignty, which is at the end of the day, embodied sovereignty is one of the major pillars of everything that I teach conceptually and really help people embody through this work. So, and a lot of people think that sovereignty is just like being independent, but it's not just being independent. It's learning how to work with people while holding your own. And that's why learning that holding your position versus proving is a form of self-leadership at the level of identity and sense of worth. So it is holding your standards when you think it would be easier to shrink, or the outcome would be easier if you shrink, or, choosing your truth over belonging. And we're going to talk about that because we do, as humans, need to find belonging. We did not evolve into the creatures that we have become without relying on other people. But the thing is that, so much has changed in the world of survival where there's not just like one tribe in, thousands of miles, and to break away would mean you have to begin your own tribe, which means you could be alone and a high rate of dying. That's literally what this is all about, is pushing up against our ancestry and a more wild version of humanity. But now, there's lots of people, and you could, shift where you are and recognize that holding your truth over belonging to a certain group is an entire spiritual journey, because you don't want to have to, beg for a seat at the table, when you could, in a leadership position, create your own table and invite people to it, or go find people whose table looks more like the kind of table you want to sit at. So, and one last teaching on that, I could talk about that as a whole in podcast in general, and that is shame and fear of not fitting in is deeply primal. It's deeply tied to survival, and that's why it's a huge part of an ego response to shrink our personalities or to try to prove something so that we don't get kicked out and abandoned. I mean, that's truly a evolutionary and ancestral position inside the body, and that's why the ego is wired to do whatever we have to do, even if it's suffering. But the ego is always going to pick predictability over enjoyment any day of the week. We have to train our egos, because our egos, if we're not aware of them, they control us 1,000,000%. So when we think about, belonging and being a part of a group, what happened in many, like thousands of years ago, in the very beginning of humanity's evolution and expansion, is that shame was a barometer. It was a way for people to understand, do I belong here or not? And truly, it was a way that humans expanded and created multiple civilizations, multiple tribes, multiple clans of people. And just so you know, clan is more of the appropriate language for me to use, because my background is almost all Scottish, Irish, and Welsh, and they were called clans, CLANN, not like some of the clans we tend to think about that try to ruin that concept. I digress for now. But it is about knowing that that's when people would feel the need to either apologize and reconvert, because they do want to stay in that group, because they do agree with that group, or they need to stay in that group. And it could also be an opportunity for people to recognize their time in that group is over, and it's time for them to start their own group or go looking for another group that does align with their values. It is a way of expansion. Like I said, it's deeply woven into us for survival, for evolution, and for the spread of humanity. Like if we all stayed in one group, there would be a lot of really interesting genes, but no, it drives us to go and expand out beyond the conditioning of our childhood. And that's why one of the biggest issues, in my opinion, is that we are living in an uninitiated society. It was really important for especially adolescents to go out and survive in nature alone, and that gave them the courage and the bravery to face, the unknown or a death situation that made them, men or women, to be able to be individuated. Individuation is the whole thing here. That is stepping into who you are and really becoming clear on who you are as an individual, because it's only after understanding who you are as an individual and valuing yourself as an individual that you can really go back out into the collective and not unconsciously bleed all over everybody that you love, or demand that everybody looks like you, or feel like you have to lose yourself so that you don't get abandoned. But what it really is that we really haven't left the nest. We really never said something like, Mom and Dad, I have to go out into the unknown and choose me. A lot of what we're doing, unfortunately, with all of this, and that's why reparenting is at the end of the day probably the majority of what you have to do to really step into your power, is we're just trying to prove to our parents, look, Mom, look, Dad, look at what we did. We're trying to close out childhood cycles of being validated and being cherished and seen. And a lot of us, especially those of us that are millennials or beyond that, like earlier, our parents were frozen. Our parents were really working on themselves, or were trained to be, non-caring. So I feel like the millennials are way trying to fix that with all of this gentle parenting stuff. And feel like we've gotten to a place evolutionarily where it's like, go back, take the consciousness, take the awareness. But we've helicoptered our kids so much that now they're these entitled little princes and princesses that see no meaning in going out into the wilderness and becoming who they are. And instead, just want to live in the nest forever. That's Gen Alpha. But I digress on that for now. Maybe we'll have a conversation about that in another session. But what I want you to understand from the viewpoint of sovereignty is that when you hold your position, you stop chasing, you stop convincing, and you stop negotiating your value. And instead, you become the center, you become the access. You find power within yourself and your truth, and you move around your truth and your value. It helps you make clear decisions. And that's why I tell people all the time, learning what it means to embody your sovereignty is to understand your truth and your values and to hold your ground. And everything that comes up when you do that is the work. Because from here, your life begins to reorganize, your relationships begin to recalibrate, and your reality responds, because power is not something you earn. It's something that you own and you stop abandoning. So let's get into a little bit more of the depth of this concept. So position is also identity, and proving is a form of performance. So this is where we kind of open up this portal of this concept into a deeper teaching, a deeper transmission or concept, if you will. And that is, the position is the self that you have decided that you are. This is also coming from a place that you have looked at yourself, you have pulled back the layers, you began to become the witness to yourself. You recognize what might be conditioning and expectation that's placed on you and what you might actually really want. You have to do that self-study, self-mastery work before you can really step into this holding a position versus proving, and it really gets somewhere. So, like I said, learning how to hold a position is learning how to hold your power and not leak your power. It's also deciding what kind of frequency you're going to live on. And this is where that old saying, your vibe attracts your tribe, is truly real. I know it's a little cringe at this point. It's kind of like eat, pray, love, or live, laugh, love, or, some of those like sayings from the early 2000s. But that one really is true, because at the end of the day, we are all vibration. We're waves of light and sound. None of us are actually material form. Nothing's actually static. Everything is wave and resonance and frequency. And when we really understand that from a quantum perspective, which is really going to begin to grow as Uranus moves into Gemini, literally 2 days from now at the time of this recording, is that we have to understand that we are creators. Our mind creates for us. It is not the other way around. The way I like to explain it to my students is like you're staring in a mirror and you're expecting the reflection of you to smile at you first. It does not work like that. It is the individual, the creator, that smiles and the reflection smiles back, not the other way around. So when you think about holding your position as an identity versus, dropping down into proving, it is that you are holding a frequency that is going to bring in a self-concept and a reality that you've only dreamed of. It hasn't been here yet. And that's what quantum leap work is all about. But when you start to prove, it becomes a loop. Positioning is a decision. It says, I understand that this is how I have been in the past, but I'm not going to do that anymore. Okay. So a position is decided. It's a chosen, anchored, and embodied belief or vision or self-ownership that exists before the external world is going to reflect it back. Proving, on the other hand, is performative. It's the ego, the part of ourself that has been conditioned and wants to survive and doesn't want to be abandoned and have to go look for something new and experience the discomfort. Because, like I said, our ego is tied to our survival. It's trying to make sure that we live, right? So people have very strong egos. I'm like, good job, you're a survivor. But we have to remember that our ego will 120% run us, when the point of Earth School is to remember that we are creators. We are co-creators with spirit. And our job is to remember to step back into the creator position and thank our ego, thank the parts of us that are got us here, work with their wisdom, honor those versions of ourselves, but then to consciously step into deciding for ourselves, stepping into our soul-centric self. That's what we're here for. That's what Earth School is actually about, is remembering your power, remembering that you are infinitely connected to source energy, whether you call that God, goddess, mystery, source. I call it spirit. Whatever that is, it is understanding there is no separation. The idea of sin and hell and all of those lower frequency, lower concept thoughts are ways to truly control us. But I digress on that today. But it is about understanding that just like Jesus was so connected to God because was a reflection of God himself, so are you. That's why the Bible says, that's why Jesus literally said, like, when you step into this energy, you can do things even greater than I. And that's because he understood with full conviction his sovereignty and his connection to what he called God. And guess what? You have that power too. At the time of this recording, Venus has ingressed 0 degrees of Gemini, and it's going to also Uranus, the god of awakening, Uranus, lightning, insight, awakening. He's the planet of awakening. They're going to move with each other and create this extremely powerful manifestation energy that's about the mind. And in Egyptian mythology, Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, and Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. But in Egyptian mythology, Mercury is also known as Thoth. And when you break it down, it looks like thought. So Thot. And that is the Egyptian god that is believed to be the magician, the creator god, the magus, who says, what do you want to create? Like, think it into being. What do you want to create? Know your power. There is no separation. You don't have to, talk to some other person to talk to God, because when you talk to yourself, you're also talking to God, because you are a fractal. You are a fraction. You are God experiencing itself. And that's very quantum, I know. And I'm going to slow down on that. I won't get into my preacher old energy, Lauren, just, step out of that pastor identity for a second. But I'm really passionate about this, because what I know that I have been charged with here is to help people remember and step into their power and their purpose, and to stop outsourcing their power to other people, but instead to step fully into it and take ownership and know that you are a co-creator with spirit. What you believe is what you will create. It's just like I said, when you're staring at a mirror and you're waiting for your reflection to validate you before you smile at it, that's not going to happen. You have to smile at the mirror, and the mirror responds with a smile. And it's the same way around your identity. And that's why, so much of the work that I've invested into in the secondary part of my work is self-concept work. And self-concept is exactly what I'm saying. It's about peeling back the layers and becoming clear on what is conditioning and expectation, and who you really are, and what's the difference, and what is the sticking glue that's keeping you stuck in trying to prove yourself or external validation, versus focusing on the internal power that you have because you are infinitely connected to God, goddess, mystery, source, spirit, whatever you call it. And the lie is that you're not. That's hell. That's the lie. The idea that you are somehow separate from that creator energy and to co-create with spirit is hell. It is a state. It is a feeling of being disconnected, abandoned. And why this work is so powerful, because when you choose to own yourself and to own your power and to hold your position, your whole world will recreate itself around you versus the other way around, which is you hope the world will just accept you if you just do what everybody else is doing. And this is where leadership comes in, because real leaders lead. They don't wait for validation. They don't wait to see how somebody else is going to do it. They just do it. They take the ownership and they lead. And that's why I always come back to Jesus. And, I'm deeply connected to Jesus. That was my very first formal religion I was ever a part of. And I say it all the time, like, I'm not a Christian, but I love Jesus. I love the teachings of Jesus and the Bible. It's just very out of context, but I digress on that for right now. But this is about understanding that what you be, right, who you choose to be, how you choose to think is going to create a world, whether you like it or not. So if you're going to be a world creator, which all of us are, then you might as well create a world that you actually want to live in. Am I right? So coming back to that proving energy, it's performative. It is the ego trying to negotiate your worth in its shape-shifting for approval, and it's outsourcing authority to the room or whoever you're trying to gain the acceptance of. So when you're proving, you're constantly asking, do you see me? Am I enough? Did I do it right? Do I belong? Do I fit? Am I going to get chosen? And when you're in the position, when you are in your position, you're holding your power and you are declaring, this is who I am. This is what I hold. This is what I create. Do you want to be here or not? So remember, proving is a loop and positioning is a decision. And decisions are portals, guys. Okay? Because where the work really is that when you recognize where you are still trying to prove yourself is where you don't yet trust your own power. This work is a mirror. So every place that you feel the pull to explain yourself, over-deliver, be understood is a place where your internal authority hasn't really landed or anchored yet. And that's why I say to really do this work, you got to look at yourself first. Because proving shows up as over-explaining your decisions, needing people to agree with you or your path, abandoning your standards to maintain some kind of connection, collapsing your truth to avoid rejection or abandonment. It's also things like when you're in business, it shows up in your pricing. It shows up in your offers big time. And that is why, your business, your entrepreneurial thing is 1,000,000% a mirror of yourself and a true initiation. But I digress on that conversation for today. But when you focus on not losing your power, you create that reality. Whereas if you lose your power, what happens is that you drop your vibration. And vibration is what's necessary. It's like where I was talking about your vibe attracts your tribe, is like you got to hold your vibe. You got to hold the frequency of who you are, who you're being, what you believe in, because it is that frequency that is going to attract something new. So I teach this a lot in my programs, and that is something that my guides taught me before this teaching, and that is dissolve or evolve. And that is when you change, when you start to take back your power, when you recognize you've been living for everyone but yourself, your frequency is going to change because you're going to start to change your mind. You're just going to start to change what you're doing and what you eat or where you invest your time or energy, and that's going to change your frequency. And when your frequency starts to change, you may not even necessarily recognize it, but the people around you will. You'll start to hear them say things like, hey, are you okay? You've been like a little different lately. I'm feeling like, we're not really on the same page. I'm not really sure where we stand. Are we good? You know, like things like that. You may hear people say things like that, and that is because they feel your shift. And your job there is to hold your frequency. And that is where the real work begins. And that is those people have to decide if they are going to evolve and rise up and meet you by being like, wow, like the journey you're on sounds so amazing. Like, I want to do that too. How do I start to work on that? Those are people that typically get to journey with you. They tend to evolve with you. But then there are some people who even get threatened by that. They can get jealous or be like, that's not my path, or ghost you or whatever, you know, however people show up. This is, again, part of Earth School, is they will dissolve out of your life, right? Or in this teaching, it is where we will still try to prove I'm not different. I'm the same. You know, don't leave me. I don't want to lose you. Versus acknowledging, yes, I have changed, and this is where I'm going. And we don't have to be on the same page, but this is where I'm going, and I do need respect as I move in this direction. That's how we get to maintain people that don't necessarily evolve. But we know that we're not really going to meet eye to eye anymore. The exchange is going to be different. And that's where, you know, I was talking about in the first part of this episode, how, you know, when you start to realize that all your friends are like, hey, can I pick your brain? Can I ask you this? Can I do that? Can I buy you a coffee? And you tell me how this is happening. That's when you know you're starting to rise into a different frequency of leadership. That's when it's usually time to start creating a service menu. But in this situation, this is about not losing your power, not losing your position, maintaining your frequency, maintaining your values, and with love and respect and clear communication, you basically say, this is where I'm going, and this is the journey that I'm on, and you let people make their decisions. And that's where, again, so much of this work really is in the loss and recognizing that, you know, everybody wants to recreate something so that they can live the life that they want to live. But most people are not prepared to understand or to experience that the exchange for this new life is the sacrifice of your previous one. And often that requires relationships and belief systems, and, you know, your entire world will start to collapse out as the new one begins to form and anchor in. And where a lot of people get in trouble is by trying to hold on to both worlds. And that's where it gets really confusing, but that's another conversation for another day, okay? So when you don't step out of your power all at once, you will leak it through micro abandonments, micro attachments. So recognizing that holding your position is going to require you to tolerate being misunderstood. To let people have their projections and their opinions of you, and to stop managing their perception and start holding your value and your vision and your beliefs and your position, which is your frequency, regardless. And yes, I know, like, this is where actually the really powerful work begins. And that's why I always have people, move into the next stage of this, which is my teaching called Worthcraft. And that is really, really, really trying to understand, you know, what are your values and what is your vision and what is aligned for you, and how you're going to be able to hold on to some things that aren't going to change, but you really want to keep them, and also be able to hold the truth of who you are and set boundaries while being able to maintain some things that you really want to hold on to. And also that the majority of your world requires the loss of your previous world to create the new one. And that is, it's complicated, guys. And this is where truly, like, the work begins. And people are always like, oh, you're an astrologer, right? And I'm like, yes, I'm an astrologer, but astrology is a tool for awareness to do this work, which is to know that you are worthy, to know that you are chosen. Like, there are many, many, many spiritual paths that teach, like, there is a huge competition to become a soul that comes to earth. And you just being here means you're worthy, okay? Like, there's so many consciousness that want to come to this planet, but you got here, which means, like, you're worthy of being here. And that is another conversation for another day. As you can see, lots of different teachings and stackings. But for right now, what I want to put out there is an invitation, and that is holding your position requires devotion, oftentimes to a self that doesn't yet exist. And that's the quantum threshold, right? Like that's why I teach astrology, to bring awareness and discernment. But just because you know something doesn't mean it's going to change anything. As a matter of fact, I think that having the burden of awareness, knowing so many things and not knowing how to change it and to just stay in your suffering is rather rude. It's rather painful. I mean, that's why, again, Jesus taught in parables. He said, only those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear will hear my message. And that's because he wasn't trying to wake people up that weren't ready to hold the burden of awareness of his truth. Because once you know something, you can't shove it back into a box of unknowing without it becoming a shadow in your subconscious or, some sort of issue that you have to repress. And that's why he didn't teach to people who weren't ready to awaken yet. And it's the same thing here today, because where you're trying to prove is where you don't yet trust your power. So being able to hold your position is going to require you to be devoted to a self that doesn't yet exist. And we call that self-concept. So it is where you recreate your sense of self and how you want to be in the world based on who you really want to be versus who you've been told you have to be or have been operating as the entire time. And so maybe, you've been a person that, wants to be behind the scenes and doesn't want to be in pictures, doesn't really want to be seen. But all of a sudden you're getting to this place where you're like, no, I want to become a news reporter, which means a camera is going to be on me. People are going to see me. Oh my God. And that's often why, our purposes awaken all of this stuff in us that we have to overcome. But then you have to deal with the fact of being seen. Another version of that would be like, I don't believe the belief system that I grew up in. I think it's oppressive. I think it's violent, especially toward women and minorities. And I don't want to embody that. I want to become more open and spiritual. But you've got all of this trauma and these stories that tell you like, having your own feelings is like a devil roaring and prowling around you, waiting to just eat you. And your feelings aren't reliable. And you have to overcome that to become this version. And therein again lies the work. So you have to create this version of yourself that is like, I'm strong and I'm intuitive and I can hold both sides and know my truth. And that version of you doesn't exist yet, because if it did, you'd already be doing it. That's just how it works. So you craft this persona, this mindset, this reality that you want to embody, and then you have to be it. Just like I said with the mirror is not going to smile at you before you do. You have to smile, and then the mirror responds is that you then go out and be that version of yourself. You start dressing like her, you start speaking like her, you start thinking like her, you start to making decisions like her. And then slowly but surely, the 3D reality will catch up to you as you quantum leap into a new reality. And that is where that previous self, that ego self, has to collapse off while the new version of self anchors in. And if you look back, you'll probably recognize you've done this unconsciously at least once or twice in your life, especially if you've gone through a Saturn return where, you're all willy-nilly about life. And then shit got serious when you went through a Saturn return, just 27 to 30. There's also lots of other initiations that happen over the course of our lives that really do force us to have to grow up and decide who we want to be. Like, we're not kids anymore. So, and then sometimes that's what we recognize is that we are stunted in childhood because we still need that validation from our caregiver in order to move forward. Well, heads up, you're the one that has to give yourself the approval so that you can move forward. And that's why this work is, again, the work. It's not just learning cool things. It's not just getting into, astrology and ritual and all of that. This is about facing yourself. This is about collapsing things out that no longer align, and the journey, the descent and the ascent of what it looks like to really face yourself and love yourself and find medicine deep within yourself and embody it. And that is the journey of sovereignty. Okay. So like I said, this work is a mirror. So every place that you feel the pull to explain yourself, to over-deliver, over-give, or be understood is a place where your internal authority hasn't landed yet. So proving is going to show up as like over-explaining your decisions and needing people to agree with you in order for you to do something. This is all about external validation. And the real work is understanding that the starting point is not outside of ourselves, it's inside of ourselves. Okay. And that's why this work requires you to be devoted to your inner authority and your inner self. And it probably doesn't even exist yet. So one of the main reasons that people fall back into approval and performance is because holding their position asks them to hold a reality before it's been validated. Pro tip, you're the one that has to validate it. But to hold the vision of a self that hasn't been confirmed yet and to move as if it's already done without applause, without evidence, without any kind of reassurance, this is the work. This is about believing in yourself and stepping into your sovereignty, learning to hold your vision. This is where Delulu until it's Trulu really happens, called the law of assumption. So in order for you not to repeat reality, you got to select it. You got to be mindful and you got to understand, where is the loop and where am I going to leap? Okay. And that's been my big word for 2026 is that, are you going to loop or are you going to leap? Uranus and Gemini is all about mental leaps. And as Thoth says, like, what you think is what you create. The magician, you have everything you need. What do you want to create? Stop giving your power to somebody else to create your reality and step in your creator power. Okay? Because we're not repeating, these realities that are dissolving, whether we like it or not. You're going to select what you want to experience, that sovereignty. And this selection is going to require you to be obsessed with your vision, to be obsessed with your worth, and to be brave in the unknown. Also, on top of that is the emotional and mental discipline to not collapse when the old timeline kind of like echoes back and it tries to draw you back into safety. Because position is how you break cycles. Because you're no longer responding to a reality, you're going to lead it. And that's what this work is truly an invitation to, is that positioning over proving, again, is the pathway to sovereignty. All right, so I hope that this part has been helpful for you. I'm going to sit with it. I would love to hear from you guys. I've gotten a lot of response from part 1, and that is we're going to keep this, whether or not we're going to keep this conversation going in a podcast. I do want to let you guys know, for the current listeners between April the 24th until about mid-May, which is Venus in Gemini, I'm running a promotion right now that is called Cosmic Clarity. It's a 45-minute reading. It's only $75. It's 50% off right now, as I really want to help people, give them the gift of the clarity and the thoughts and the insight so that they can jump straight into, holding their position versus trying to prove, and utilizing this energy of Venus and Uranus, both in Gemini, the mind, communication, to jumpstart this manifestation process, okay, known as self-concept. The other thing is that I'm going to be running a live webinar on this concept on Monday, May 11th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you're following me on the socials and also on my Patreon so that you can see what it looks like to get a free ticket to attend. I can't wait to see you there. And until next time, ciao. I hope that this illuminated some things for you and helps you really look within to help you understand where you might be performing for love and approval and where you might be seeking external validation when you really need to find the ways to validate yourself and show up for yourself.